The first question for today is, what has been your individual experience of queerness in the Pasifika community?
I think queer community for me is something that's always just existed as a part of my family. But I think in the context of growing up here, queer community has always been a source of strength. And, I think this is probably a good time to acknowledge queer elders and ancestors that were here in Gadigal country and set up a lot of the things that we know. The late Carmen Rupe, activist, sex worker, incredible trans person, Whakatapui person. Phyllis Munro, incredible Koki Airani elder who also passed away, who told me as a young person, always remember that we pay our taxes here and we are part of this community and we contribute. And I always feel that that's a really important thing to think about, how the most invisible people are constantly contributing to society and society's health. Some of the most invisible things about Pacific culture that exists because queer communities and queer people enable them to exist in a more visible way than some of our other more established counterparts from our community. So I think for me, identifying as queer means accepting that I can be who I am and I can evolve and I can change and feel strength in that with other people who also identify with queer identity.
Thank you. That was good. So I was thinking about this question, reading over them, and I was thinking, and I sort of realised that it feels like for me it depends on environment and where I'm placed, and I think my queerness within Pasifika communities, it depends on where I am. When I think of being a child, when I lived in Samoa, my grandmother would have been the first person that recognised my queerness, and what I love about, I guess, my queerness and the way it relates within our culture. I'll speak specifically to Samoan culture, but how it relates is that it seemed to be from a young age with my grandmother that was something that was recognised, and her way of sort of like communicating that with me was about guiding me in like what my role and relationship was within village and family, and that was, like I have memories of my nana. Every time there was something happening, it was like my role to get up on siva to dance, and then she also loved the garden, so she was always out in the garden. So like for her, it was always bringing me out to prepare food and to like use a machete, which I wasn't very great at. But so that sort of, I guess, was my first connection to my queerness within Pasifika communities, and then here within church, when I was younger, I was in a Parangi mixed island church, and that I would say that was sort of wasn't an easy experience because it was a very conservative church. So that was a situation, and then in my adult life, and living on Gadigal land in central Sydney, for many years, I didn't feel like I felt connected to Pasifika people here, or that it was like I was trying to find my place. And then, so in my recent years, it's sort of been about finding queer Pasifika artists, and that takes a whole new form because we relate to each other in different ways, and also through the arts, using sort of like colonial frameworks and language about how we talk about our identity. Yeah.
For me, when I think about like my queerness, like I think of, you know, the women that I was raised by, and I had like my mum had me around like her two cousins who I didn't know until later that they were like heavy duty dykes, but like they put me onto like Missy Elliott and like, you know, just like really lit music, but I never had access to like the Fijian community when I was growing up here, and it wasn't until like kind of similar to you, it wasn't until I kind of came around the dirty habit that I saw a lot of parallels of how my home, not only like in my mum's home, but also in my home back in Fiji, was like, yeah, there was just a lot of parallels that like made me remember a lot of things, if that makes any sense. And it was like, oh, yeah, home, like this can be home too in this way. Yeah.
Yeah, my mum is white. I grew up in really working class, really white suburbs in Melbourne at a time when queerness, at time and place when, for me, queerness and even, well, really diverse cultures weren't really that visible. So, and then, so I think it took me a long time to find places and people that I felt comfortable to connect with, and being here in Gadigal has been really vital for that process for me. Like, so for me, it's my experience of both queerness and Pasifika community have been really tightly entwined because, you know, of knowing people like this. That has been, they have really have, you know, and lots of other people that we could. There's a huge list of people. But moving through these communities and engaging with different people who are, you know, discovering as diaspora are exploring the same things has meant that I have been able to, you know, take on or just like explore language and ways to identify myself, ways to understand, you know, where I sit at this nexus between white cultures and Māori culture. And I don't know, it's something, at the moment at least, I'm kind of thinking about my experience of those things as being quite playful. Like I occupy a space where I'm able to kind of adopt and claim ideas and traditions and language that maybe, maybe I'm just trying those things on. But that has been really liberating for me to take up that space as a queer person and not necessarily have to look, you know, or I guess knowing that I don't have, you know, I didn't grow up within really strong Māori culture. I'm still able to, feel, I guess, comfortable in this space where
Yes.
I was just thinking, reflecting a little bit more on that question and thinking about how we, within our various, like our diverse Pacific cultures, because the region is huge, and we identify with being connected through the sea and through the ocean, and having this complex identity of having ancestry that you know, are shape-shifting, that are gender fluid, and you know, this is part of our like Indigenous heritage from the region. And so I think that to kind of work out how do we do it now and how do we do it as diaspora is so cool, you know.